Hey guys, home safe and sound. And it was a week that was completely needed. And I understand that not many people have had the ability, the chances, or even the financial capacity to even go on a trip right now, especially with all of the different restrictions from face to face and the ones that we've had. But it seems like the silver lining's becoming shinier and shinier because things are slowly reopening. I think by the end of the month, we're going to see things going back to a semi-normal type way of living, but we're still going to try our best to be careful and not get reckless. We know that this disease is not going anywhere, and we do need to be sensible about being around the elderly, those with underlying conditions. So I hope we continue to do that. But this week was not only an unexpected trip, it was a much needed trip, especially with the things that I've been struggling with lately. And it was wonderful to be able to see family that I don't see very often in conjunction with someone that's going to be family in just a few months. Plans are still in motion and things are still going ahead. And we're all keeping our fingers crossed, but still trying to be realistic about what's happening. But to be hopeful. In fact, being hopeful is something that a lot of people really are not having right now. I know a few weeks back, being hopeful was definitely not something I was doing. I was spending a lot of my time ruminating and burying my psyche with all of the problems and all of the potential problems. Everything was just one swirling eddy of despair. And what does that say about someone who wants to tell the world that's suffering right now that there's a better way, that there's a comfort out there, there's a reward out there. But that message is going to be hard to come across with a attitude of everything is wrong, everything is dark, everything is meaningless. Could almost take the words of Solomon and repeat it over and over. All is vanity. But this trip, as fortunate as I was to be on it, what it did allow me to do is reshift my focus. It let me realize, better yet, it reminded me that things are still okay. There are things that are not okay, but there are things that are still okay. Focus kind of is what I'm going for today. Because when you go on a vacation, part of it is to help reshift your focus. Focus on things that are not homebound. Responsibilities, bills, problems, whether socially, financially, emotionally, you name it. And this trip definitely allowed me to take myself out of this dark, dark circle that I'd constructed around myself and go into an area that's familiar but contains a lot of things to help me retrack and reprocess and regroup. If I choose to make the negative my focus, which is so tempting, then one thing is for sure. All that will amount to is me constructing my own misery and living in it, but then wondering why I'm there. There was a famous Irish poet by the name of James Joyce, and he had this to say about what we put in our minds. He says, "Your mind will give back to you exactly what you put into it." It sounds redundant, but it's so true. If I'm going to do nothing but swallow the negative and swallow the failures and swallow the missed opportunities, if that's all I'm going to do and give no account to the other things, the good things, the positive things, the things that are worth talking about, then I'm basically going to create my own little world of pure darkness. And there's nothing in Scripture that says a Christian should be anything close to darkness, living in it, behaving like it, anything. But that's what happens when we spend all of our time and committing all of our mental energy into the negative. You know, one of the things I got to see while I was down south, I got to go to the Cumberland Island, right off of Georgia and Florida. And I was there at a roughly about dusk time, and I could see the sun, the rays protruding through the clouds. Now, the sun wasn't shining on me. It didn't necessarily make things brighter, but I could still see the rays of sun pushing through the clouds that were blocking the entirety. Now, I could have sat there and done nothing but see the clouds. I could have spent all of my time looking at the clouds and ignore the fact that the sun was still behind the clouds. It had never left. It was still there warming our earth, and it was even piercing through the clouds in certain places. It was still there. If all I chose to see were the clouds, I would have missed the sun completely. You know, David understood what it meant to keep focus. As a king, as a leader, as a Christian, he understood that there were problems in life, and real problems, not superficial stuff, real issues. He was a man that was loved by God but hated by many. He had enemies. Some were even family. His own best friend, Jonathan's father, Saul, wanted to kill David because David was more pleasing to God than Saul was. David made mistakes, did things he shouldn't have done. He paid for those things. Life was not a bed of roses just because he was the king. And often throughout the Psalms, he has to remind himself really, that God needs to still be our focus, even though there's a lot of stuff happening. He writes in Psalm 94, in verse 19, "In the multitude of my anxieties within me, your comforts delight my soul." David was no stranger to trial and tribulation, and he even made it known. There was a multitude of anxieties in his mind. Sounds very similar to ruminating or overthinking, which is something we do. Something I know I've done a lot of lately. But he says, your comforts delight my soul. Mixed in there, God's own comforts were delighting his soul. Well, what comforts? God gives us assurance that no one else can give us. God gives us promises, or makes promises, that are never broken. God has the ability to do anything that we can't. He has the ability to stop things that we can't. He said it very clearly throughout the New Testament and the Old Testament too. He would be there with you. Sometimes we get sick and are in the hospital. We don't expect our family members to heal us. But are we not happy when they're there, holding our hands, visiting us, talking with us, reminding us that they're thinking of you? That makes a gigantic difference while you're waiting to be treated. Doesn't God do the same thing? Only with one exception, he never leaves. God doesn't leave. He doesn't step out. He is forever present in every situation you're in. But if you choose not to focus on God, then what you will focus on is everything else. And everything else will do nothing for you. When you choose to acknowledge the darkness, but ignore God completely, the darkness is where you'll stay. And what hope is there in that? Paul the Apostle was talking to the Christians at Colossae as he was writing his letter to the Christians that lived there. He wrote a very familiar verse, but it's one I haven't thought of a whole lot when it comes to this concept of focus. But there's a new angle for me to look at this verse from now. It's in Colossians chapter 3, verse 2. Set your mind on things above, not on things on the earth. Is Paul telling us to ignore what's going on down here? No. But that does not where he says our focus should be. Our focus should always be on things above, things of God, things of holiness, things of righteousness. That doesn't mean that we turn a blind eye to everything around us, but we don't allow the cares of the world to become the center of our universe. It's not the dot in the center of everything else. That is where God needs to be. Because when that focus is what you look at, everything else to the side appears very small. Yeah, it's there. Doesn't mean we don't have to go through it. Doesn't mean we don't have to deal with it. But God is at the center. And the more you go towards God, you'll notice those things will go behind. It's just like a tunnel. As you go through a tunnel and it's dark, your focus is at the end of the tunnel where there's light. And the farther you move towards the light, the darkness passes behind you until you eventually reach the end. That's what this life does down here. But our focus has to be on God. I hope that that's what we're focusing on right now. And I certainly hope that as our doors hopefully open next Sunday morning and we get to see each other again face to face, that our focus will be renewed and that we will get back to where we were before. My focus has not always been on the good things, but I plan to make that change right here, right now. It's good to be home, and I hope to see all of you next Sunday. And those are the words from the couch.